My name is Theodore Tate, and I'm 70 years old. At my only son's wedding, he seated me at the children's table. Not by accident. He did it so his rich new in-laws could fill the head table up front, where the good light was, where the photographer pointed. I found my name on a card beside a high chair and a bowl of crayons. I smiled. I sat down. A 7-year-old girl named Lily folded me a crown out of gold paper and told me I could be the king of her table. I wore it. What none of them knew, least of all my own son, was that the glittering family up front had spent an entire year begging my office for a meeting. They just didn't know it was my office. And in about an hour, when the in-laws stood to toast a name they thought they owned, I was going to stand up too. Welcome back to Dad's Master Plan, where the quiet fathers get the last word. If you've ever been the one nobody bothered to introduce, you're among friends here. Drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe. Now, to tell you how I ended up in a paper crown at the children's table, I have to take you back about a year, to the night my son called and said he was marrying a Whitmore. Let me tell you who I am, because it's the whole misunderstanding. 40-some years ago, I started a little machine shop in a rented unit with a leaking roof. I made precision instruments, the small, boring, exact things that go inside bigger machines. I named the company Tate Mark, half after myself and half after my wife Joan, who did the books at the kitchen table and never once let me round a number. I sold that company in 2009 for more than a boy from a gravel road has any business seeing. And instead of buying a yacht I didn't want, Joan and I started the Tate Family Foundation. We give the money away. Scholarships, clinics, music programs for kids who can't afford an instrument. I sign the letters, T. Tate. I like the quiet. Money's loudest, I've found, when you don't need to mention it. Joan passed 3 years ago. Heart in her sleep, which is the only mercy in any of it. I kept her wedding ring on a chain under my shirt. I kept wearing my old work boots, the ones she used to threaten to throw out. People at galas assume I'm somebody's driver. I let them. You learn a great deal about a person in the 10 seconds before they decide you don't matter. I have one child, Daniel. 33, sharp, handsome, ambitious in a way that always seemed to be running away from something. From me, mostly. I just didn't want to admit it. So when Daniel called me one evening, bright and breathless, and said, "Dad, I'm getting married. Her name's Sophie Whitmore," I was happy for him. I was. I want that on the record. I just didn't hear what he said next quite right. What he said next was, "Now, Dad, these are serious people. So just, keep it simple around them." I'd been hearing some version of that my whole life as his father. When Daniel was 12, he asked me to drop him a block from school so his friends wouldn't see the truck. At his college graduation, which I paid for, cash, no loans, he introduced me to his roommates as my dad. He's in manufacturing, and changed the subject fast. I told myself it was a phase. Phases end. This one just changed clothes and kept going. He'd taken money from me his whole life and spent the whole time a little embarrassed by where it came from. The gravel road, the boots, the shop that smelled like cutting oil. He wanted to be polished, and he decided somewhere along the way that I was the opposite of polished. "Keep it simple," I said back to him on the phone. "I can do simple." "Why, I mean it, Dad. The Whitmores are old money. Symphony boards, that whole world. Mom's family was the same way, and you always made it weird. Joan's family had looked down on me too, 40 years ago. The difference was Joan never let them seat me at the children's table." "I won't make it weird," I said. "Thank you." Seriously. Relief in his voice like he'd diffused something. "You'll love Sophie." I would, as it turned out. Sophie was the best thing the whole disaster ever gave me. I hung up and sat in the quiet kitchen where Joan used to do the books, and I thought about the word simple, and how a man can spend 40 years building something complicated and exact, and still get handed that word by his own son. I said okay. I always said okay. I met the Whitmores at a club with valet parking and a dress code I read about beforehand so I wouldn't embarrass Daniel. Richard Whitmore had a politician's handshake and a voice built for rooms with high ceilings. Vivian Whitmore wore pearls and a smile that did inventory. She looked at my sport coat, my boots, the spot where a nicer watch should have been, and filed me somewhere near the bottom of a drawer. "And what is it you do, Theodore?" Vivian asked over the first course. Daniel answered before I could. "Dad's retired. He used to tinker with machines. Little shop, you know." "How charming," said Vivian, in the tone you'd use for a child's drawing. I let it stand. I'm good at letting things stand. Over dinner they performed. Richard chaired the conservatory, he said 3 or 4 times, the way you repeat something you're worried about. Vivian listed names, a senator, a museum, our friends in the foundation world. And then she said it, light as a canapé. "We're in conversations with the Tate Family Foundation, actually. Their flagship grant. It would change everything for the conservatory." I kept my face still and my fork moving. The Tate Family Foundation. I'd signed every grant that thing had ever made. I was sitting 18 inches from a woman bragging about her relationship with me, and she'd just decided I tinkered with machines. "That sounds important," I said. "Oh, it is." Vivian smiled. "These things come down to relationships, Theodore. Knowing the right people." "I've heard that," I said. I drove my simple self home that night, past the gravel roads, thinking that the right people were apparently already at her table, and she'd seated him next to the breadbasket. Sophie was different. I knew it within 5 minutes, and I never stopped knowing it. She found me on the club's back terrace after dinner, where I'd gone to escape the performance. She didn't have a drink in her hand or a name to drop. She just sat down next to the old man in boots and asked me a real question. "Daniel says you had a machine shop. What did you make?" So I told her. Gauges, fittings, the parts inside things people never think about. She listened like it mattered. She asked about Joan. When I told her Joan did the books and caught every rounding error, Sophie laughed and her eyes went soft. "He never talks about you," she said. "Daniel, I don't understand it. You're the easiest person here to talk to." "He's got a lot on his mind," I said, covering for him, the way I always did. "Maybe," she studied me. "Can I tell you something? My family can be a lot. The names, the boards, the performance. It's exhausting. You don't do any of that." "I'm too old to perform," I said. "It's a young man's game." She smiled, but something stayed serious in her face. "I'm glad Daniel has you, even if he doesn't act like it." I didn't know what to say to that. So I said the true thing. "He's a good boy who wants very badly to be a certain kind of man. Sometimes those two things argue." Sophie was quiet a moment. Then she squeezed my arm, stood, and went back inside to the noise. She was the only Whitmore who'd looked me in the eye all night. I didn't know yet how much I'd come to need that. The next week, back at the foundation office, my assistant Ruth set a stack of files in front of me and tapped the top one. "This one's getting attention," she said. "Big ask. An arts organization, flagship grant. Board's already curious because the place has a name." "Let the committee start the review," I said. "Same as anything. I'll look when they're done." I didn't open it. I want you to understand that because it matters later. I run that foundation on a simple rule Joan and I wrote on the first day. The money follows the work, not the names. Committee reviews first. I don't put my thumb on the scale. Not for friends, not for enemies, not for anyone. "You sure?" Ruth asked. "Vivian Whitmore's office has called 4 times. Very relationship forward." The name went through me like a cold draft. "Whitmore," I said. "You know them?" "My son's marrying their daughter in 8 months." Ruth's eyebrows went up. She's worked with me 20 years. She knows exactly how I feel about thumbs on scales. "Do you want to recuse?" "Not yet," I said. "Let the committee work. Don't tell them who I am. If it's a good grant, it'll stand on its own. If it isn't, I'm not going to be the reason it floats." She nodded slowly and took the stack back. I went home that night and didn't open the file then either. I told myself I was being principled. Some of it was. Some of it was something quieter. A man wanting to see, with his own eyes, what his son's new family would do when they thought no one important was watching. I found out whose file it was 8 days before the wedding. In the months that followed, I watched my son quietly edit me out of his own story. I heard about it sideways, the way you always do. A cousin who'd been to an engagement party told me, gently, what Daniel had been telling people. That his father was a retired mechanic. That I kept to myself. that I wasn't really comfortable in that world, so they shouldn't expect much of me. He wasn't lying exactly. He was just sanding me down to a size that wouldn't embarrass him. He never mentioned Tate Mark. He never mentioned the foundation. 40 years of building something, and my own son had decided the safest version of me was the smallest one. I confronted him once, mildly. We were in his car. "You told the Whitmores I'm a mechanic." He didn't even flinch. "It's easier, Dad. If they think you're just a regular guy, there's no pressure, no expectations. You don't have to keep up." "Keep up," I repeated. "You know what I mean. Their world's intense. I'm protecting you, honestly." That was the part that got me. He'd convinced himself that hiding me was a kindness, that shrinking his father down to a regular guy was something he was doing for me. "Regular guy," I said. "I built something with that word once, you know." He laughed like I'd made a joke and turned up the radio. I looked out the window at the road going by. I'd given this boy everything I had, the money, the schooling, the soft landing every time he fell. And somewhere in all that giving, I'd taught him that what I was could be a liability. That one was on me, too. I'd been quiet so long he mistook it for having nothing to say. The seating chart was where the smallness finally had a place to sit. It was 3 weeks before the wedding. I'd come by the Whitmore's house to drop off a check for the band. My contribution, which Daniel had accepted without quite thanking me, and I heard them in the dining room before they heard me. Vivian and Daniel bent over a poster board covered in little name cards. "We have to fix the head table," Vivian was saying. "It's the photographs, darling. Everyone who matters is in them." "What about my dad?" Daniel asked. Not a protest. A logistics question. A pause. The little scratch of a card being moved. "Put him with the children," Vivian said. "He'll be more comfortable back there. And honestly, he won't know the difference." I waited for my son to say something, to say anything. He's my boy. I've watched him win arguments since he was 4 years old. He had 100 words, and he used none of them. "Yeah?" Daniel said. "That's probably easier." I stepped back into the hall before they could see me. I set the check on the side table quietly, and I let myself out. I sat in my truck in their circular driveway for a while, under a porch lamp the size of a streetlight. And I'll be honest with you, that one landed. Not the in-law. The mother of the bride I could forgive. She didn't know me. It was the silence next to her. The boy I raised agreeing that the children's table was where his father belonged. I told myself it was just a seating chart, a small thing. One night. It wasn't a small thing. It was the truest thing anyone had said about how my son saw me. And I drove home knowing it. That night I did what I always do when I don't know what to do. I talked to Joan, not out loud. I'm not gone yet. But I sat in her chair at the kitchen table, the one with the worn arm, and I asked her what I should do about a son who'd hidden me like a stain on a tablecloth. Joan had a saying. She had a lot of them, but this one came to me clearest. "Pride," she used to say, "is the most expensive thing a man can buy, and he always pays full price." She wasn't talking about me when she said it. She'd be saying it about Daniel now, about the Whitmores, about people so frightened of looking small that they'd shrink the only people who actually loved them. I made a decision at that table. I was going to go to the wedding. I was going to sit wherever they put me, even if it was a beanbag chair in the coat room, because the day was Daniel's and Sophie's, and I would not be the man who turned his son's wedding into a war. But I wasn't going to lie about who I was. Not anymore. If the truth happened to walk into that room on its own 2 feet, I wasn't going to grab it by the collar and drag it back out. For 40 years I'd made myself smaller to keep the peace. I was done shrinking, not loud, not angry, just done. I went to bed lighter than I'd felt in months. 3 days later, Ruth called me from the office. The arts file had finished committee review, and the name on it, she said carefully, was one I needed to see for myself. Before I tell you about the file, I have to tell you what Vivian was doing out in the world, because it made the whole thing almost unbelievable. Sophie let it slip over coffee a few weeks before the wedding. She didn't mean anything by it. She was just venting about her mother. "Mom's been telling everyone the conservatory is saved," Sophie said, stirring her cup. "She keeps saying we have a direct line to the Tate Foundation, that the grant is basically a done deal. She told the whole gala committee, the Tates adore us. I set my coffee down very carefully. The Tates, I said. Some big philanthropy family. Mom acts like they're personal friends. Sophie rolled her eyes, affectionate and tired. I've never seen any of them. I think it's mostly Mom's imagination, honestly. But she's got everyone believing the money's coming. I looked at this kind young woman, my son's bride, who had no idea she was sitting across from the entire Tate family. Every last living member of it, one old man in boots. What if it doesn't come? I asked. The money? Sophie's face went tight. Then I don't know what happens to the conservatory. Or to Mom, honestly. She staked everything on it, her whole standing. She shook it off, made herself smile. But it'll come. She's sure. The Tates adore us. I was the only Tate left. And I had never met Vivian Whitmore until she put me near the breadbasket and told the room I tinkered with machines. I didn't say any of that. I just paid for the coffee. Quietly, the way I do everything. And I drove to the office to finally open the file. But first, Richard gave himself away. He just didn't know it was me he was confessing to. It happened at the menu tasting, a week out. The wedding party was sampling beef and salmon in a private room, and Richard had had 2 glasses of something expensive and gone a little loose. He ended up beside me at the end of the table, the old mechanic, safe to talk to precisely because he thought I didn't count. Between us, Theodore, he said, low, swirling his glass, can I be honest with you? Man to man? Always, I said. This wedding is the best thing to happen to our family in a decade. He stared into the wine. The conservatory's in trouble. Real trouble. We're between donors. The endowment's been restructured, let's say, more than once. My father built that place. I'm not going to be the Whitmore who loses it. That's a hard wait, I said, and I meant it. We're 1 grant away from safe. 1. There's a foundation. Quiet people, old-fashioned, the good kind, and if they come through, everything holds. He finally looked at me, and for a second there was a frightened man under the silver hair. Everything holds, Theodore. I hope it comes through, I said. It has to. He drained the glass. Then the silver hair came back, and the politician's spine, and he laughed at himself. Listen to me, crying to the mechanic. Forget I said anything. Already forgotten, I said. But I didn't forget. He needed my yes more than he needed the air in that room. He'd just spent 5 minutes confessing it to the one man who could give it, or withhold it. And he was so sure I was no one that he never even felt the danger. The file, when I finally opened it, told the truth that Richard's wine had only hinted at. The Whitmore Conservatory's application was thick and beautiful, and underneath the gloss, a mess. My committee had flagged it cleanly, not knowing it had anything to do with me. Administrative costs had ballooned year over year. 2 restricted endowment funds, money donors had given for specific purposes, had been quietly borrowed against for operating expenses. That's not a rounding error. Joan would have had words. The programs they actually ran for kids were thin. The galas they threw for themselves were not. On the merits, it was a weak grant. The kind my committee turns down 12 times a year without losing sleep. And here's where a smaller man would have had his fun. I could have killed it with 1 note in the margin. I could have floated it with 1 too. Handed Richard his everything holds. Bought my son's in-laws for the price of a signature. Made myself, at last, the most important man at the Whitmore table. I did neither. I wrote 1 line back to the committee. Review it exactly as you'd review any other. Do not factor in any personal connection. I am recusing myself from the final vote. Then I told Ruth to keep my name out of it entirely until I said otherwise. You're really not going to use it, Ruth said. Not a question. After 20 years, almost a smile. Use it for what? I said. To make people respect me. Respect you can buy isn't worth the wire transfer. She laughed, but she also looked at me a beat too long. The way you look at someone walking calmly toward a cliff. Just don't get hurt, she said. 8 days to the wedding. I went home and shined my boots. Sophie called me 2 nights before the wedding. Late. I could hear she'd been crying. I'm sorry, she said. I just needed to talk to someone who isn't insane right now. You called the right old man, I said. I specialize in insane. She laughed wetly. My family's a lot, Theo. The seating, the photos, the lists of who matters. And he's getting like them. Sharper. He snapped at a waiter today over a centerpiece. A pause. That's not who he is it? I sat with that. It would have been so easy to warn her, to tell her about the children's table, to tell her who I was and let her carry it. I didn't. It wasn't mine to drop on her 2 nights before her wedding. He's a good man fighting with the man he thinks he's supposed to be, I said. Sometimes the wrong one wins a round. It doesn't mean he loses the fight. You really believe that? I have to. He's my son. She was quiet, then softly. You'd tell me if something was really wrong, wouldn't you? I would, I said, and I meant it. Just not tonight. Tonight you should sleep. Okay. A breath. Theo, whatever happens this weekend, I'm really glad you're going to be there. Wild horses, I said. We hung up. I sat in the dark a while. She'd asked me to promise I'd tell her if something was wrong. And something was very wrong, a whole architecture of it. Names and lies and a children's table. But it wasn't going to land best for me in a phone call in the dark. It was going to land best in a bright room, in front of everyone, when the truth simply stood up and introduced itself. The thing that decided how I'd handle the whole night arrived in a Navy portfolio with the Tate Foundation seal stamped in silver on the front. Ruth brought it to my house herself, 8 days out, because she didn't trust it to a courier. Inside was the full Whitmore file, cleaned up for the final record, and clipped to the front, where I couldn't miss it, was a letter. A personal letter from Vivian Whitmore to my office. I read it twice. Dear friends at the Tate Foundation, it began, and went on in that pearls and canapes voice to remind us of our long and valued relationship. There was no relationship. We had never met. Then the part that made me set the letter down on the table, very gently, the way you set down something hot. As you may know, Vivian had written, my daughter is marrying into a wonderful, well-connected family this spring. We so look forward to deepening our ties to people of real significance, and I trust that history of goodwill will be reflected when the committee makes its decision. She was name-dropping a connection to important people to pressure my foundation into funding her. The important family she meant was the family she was, at that very moment, planning to seat at the children's table. She was leveraging me, against me, to get money from me, and she had no idea I was all three. I sat at Joan's table, and I felt that cold, clean calm I used to get right before I closed a hard deal. Not anger, clarity. I closed the Navy portfolio. I ran my thumb over the silver seal. I'll let them introduce me, I said to the empty kitchen, in their own words, at their own table. Then I put the portfolio in my truck, where it would ride, quietly, to the wedding. I made one phone call before the wedding. To Grace Okafor. Grace runs our scholarship program. She's sharp, decent, and as it happened, she already knew Sophie. They'd served together on a youth arts board, 2 good people in a sea of performers. Sophie had invited her to the wedding months ago, never connecting that Grace's quiet family foundation job and Theo the mechanic were the same address. Grace, I said, you're going to Sophie's wedding. I am. Small world. Smaller than you think. I told her about Daniel, the Whitmores, the file, the children's table. She was quiet for a long moment. What do you want me to do? She finally asked. Be a guest. Enjoy the cake. Don't announce anything. I paused. But if someone asks you directly who I am, don't you lie for them. I've had enough people shrink me to a comfortable size. Theo, she said, and I heard the smile. It would be my honor not to lie. That was all I arranged. No speech, no ambush. One principled woman, told simply not to lie if asked. The rest I'd leave to the room. If you've ever been underestimated, seated in the back, talked over, introduced as, just something, I want you to hear this part. You don't have to get loud to get seen. You just have to stop helping people make you small. So if that lands, do me a favor. Subscribe and leave one word in the comments. Seen, so I know you're out there. That night, I laid out my one good suit, plain and pressed. I shined my old boots until Joan would have rolled her eyes. And I got ready to go and sit, without complaint, at the children's table at my own son's wedding. I was, it turned out, more ready than anyone in that ballroom. The wedding was at the Whitmore Country Club, a place built to make you feel like you'd snuck in. I got there early, in my plain suit and my clean boots, Joan's ring under my collar. The ceremony was lovely, I'll give them that. Sophie was radiant. Daniel cried at the altar, and for a moment he was just my boy again, overwhelmed by something bigger than his ambitions. I cried a little too. I'm not ashamed of it. It was at the reception that Daniel found me, gripped my elbow, and walked me a few steps away from the crowd. His smile was tight. Dad, please, I'm begging you. Don't make today weird. I'm not planning on weird, I said. They put you at... There's a table for you. Just sit where they put you. Don't wander up to the head table for photos, okay? It throws off the whole arrangement. I know exactly where they put me, I said. I'll sit right there. Relief flooded his face. The same relief from the phone a year ago. He thought he'd diffused me again. Thank you. I mean it. Today's about the Whitmores. Just blend in. Blending in, I said, is something I've done my whole life. He took it as agreement and hurried off to be photographed. He'd missed it completely. Blending in was never the same as having nothing to show. I'd blended in through 40 years of board meetings where I owned the building. I'd blended in at galas funded by my own checks. My son had mistaken a lifetime of not bragging for a lifetime of having nothing to brag about. Across the ballroom, Grace caught my eye and gave me the smallest nod. It was almost time. My place card was at a round table in the far corner, past the dance floor near the kitchen doors. The children's table. There were 6 kids and me. A booster seat, a scatter of crayons, a basket of dinner rolls someone had decided the little ones and the old mechanic could share. Up front, under the good light, the head table gleamed with Whitmores and the people who mattered to them. Sophie saw it on her way in. Her face fell, then flushed with anger. She started toward me, ready to tear up the seating chart with her own hands. I caught her eye and shook my head, just slightly. Not tonight, sweetheart. Not yet. She stopped, torn, and a photographer pulled her away. So I sat down with the children. And here's the part the Whitmores never could have planned for. The children were wonderful. They didn't care about my boots. A boy showed me a loose tooth with enormous pride. A pair of twins argued about dinosaurs and made me the judge. And a 7-year-old girl named Lily, in a green dress, studied me with great seriousness across the rolls. Are you somebody's grandpa? She asked. I'm somebody's dad, I said. He's getting married today. She thought about this. Then she took a sheet of gold paper from the craft basket, and with the fierce concentration only a 7-year-old can summon, she folded and tore and folded again, and made a crown. She reached up and set it on my head. There, Lily said, you can be the king of our table. The kids cheered, the twins bowed, and I sat there in a paper crown at the children's table at my son's wedding, and I felt, of all things, happy. King of the kids' table. I'd held a few titles in my life. None of them ever fit me half so well. Then up front, Richard Whitmore tapped a microphone. Richard's toast started the way those toasts always do. Welcome. Thank you. What a beautiful day. 200 faces turned up toward the head table and the good light. Then he got to the part he'd clearly been waiting all night to say. Vivian and I want to share a little family news, Richard said, beaming, an arm around his wife. As many of you know, the conservatory has been my father's legacy, and ours. And I'm thrilled to tell you that we are entering a new chapter. In partnership with the prestigious Tate Family Foundation. A ripple of impressed murmurs, glasses lifted. A new era for the arts in this city, Richard said, built, as the best things are, on relationships. Vivian glowed beside him. She leaned to murmur something to Richard, not as quietly as she thought, and I was close enough to the side aisle to catch it. Smile for the back tables too, darling, she said. Then with a glance toward my corner, lower, well, not that one. He won't know the difference back there. There it was again, the same sentence from the seating chart, 3 weeks later, polished smooth from use. He won't know the difference. 200 people raised their glasses to a foundation they thought belonged to the Whitmores. My son raised his glass too, beaming up at his in-laws, his back to the corner where his father sat in a paper crown. I looked down at my glass. I looked at Lily. who was solemnly toasting with her apple juice because the grown-ups were doing it. Then I set my glass on the table and I stood up. A few heads turned at the movement. The strange old man at the children's table, on his feet. Daniel saw me. The color drained out of his face. "Excuse me," I said in my plain and caring voice. "Might I add a few words?" I didn't raise my voice. I've never had to. I stood there at the children's table, the gold paper crown still on my head, my glass in my hand, and I waited the way you wait for a room to come to you. It came. "Dad?" Daniel was half out of his chair, his smile a rictus. "Dad, sit down. This isn't—" "It's the father of the groom," Sophie said, clear and firm from the head table, and there was steel in it I hadn't heard before. "Let him speak." 200 people looked from the glittering head table to the old man by the kitchen doors. You could feel them trying to place me. The help? A lost guest? Somebody's grandfather who'd wandered up. "I'll just be a moment," I said. I wanted to toast my son, and to thank the Whitmores for a beautiful evening. I turned just slightly toward Vivian. I lifted my glass an inch. "And to say how glad I was to hear about the foundation partnership," I said. "Lovely news. I'd know that foundation anywhere." Vivian gave me the polite, baffled smile you give a stranger who's gotten above himself. "How kind," she said, already looking for someone to wave me back down. "And you are—" "Forgive me." I inclined my head, the crown tipping slightly. "We've actually never been properly introduced. My son saw to that." Daniel made a small sound, like a man watching a glass roll toward the edge of a counter. "My name is Theodore Tate," I said. The name didn't land yet, not for most of them. They didn't know to listen for it. But across the room, Grace Okafor set down her napkin and stood up. And at the head table, I watched a single question begin to form on Vivian Whitmore's face. "The first real fear of the night." "Tate," Vivian repeated. The smile held, but the corners had stopped believing in it. "It's a common enough name," I said kindly. "I won't bore you. 40 years ago I started a little machine shop, named it partly after my late wife, Joan. We made small, exact things. I sold it some years back. I kept my voice easy, conversational, a man telling a story at the children's table, which is exactly what I was. And then Joan and I did something with the money. We started a foundation. Scholarships, clinics, music programs for kids who can't afford an instrument. We try to be quiet about it. Joan always said the giving's worth more when you're not standing next to it taking a bow. A few people had gone very still, the ones who'd heard the word foundation twice now, in 2 different mouths, and were starting to do arithmetic. Vivian laughed, a bright, brittle sound. "How nice. A little family charity." "A little one," I agreed. Daniel found his voice at last, lurching up from his seat. "Dad runs a small thing. It's basically a hobby, everyone. Please, let's get back to—" "What's it called?" someone asked from a side table. A curious voice. The room wanted the answer now. I looked at Vivian. I gave her every chance to feel it coming. "Go ahead and ask," I said gently. "You've written to it enough times." And Vivian Whitmore, who had spent